All right. Are we all here? Are we all mixed? So let's get started. We're going to go into the session of sustainable and food systems. And very important.
Is it a good thing to perform this
Problems. Well, they have to be sustainable and resilient.
I don't want to compete.
This presenter will be Dr. Bimba Chimonyo from CIMET, based in Harare. What are you from scientist? So you talk about food, nutrition, food. No, so we have one presentation. We have all the time up to 5 o'clock.
And with all the time up to 5 o'clock. And then right. We were all given a notebook and a pen, right? So they're gonna be a special prize for the one who gets them all correctly. All the terms, the key terms and everything in their own. Okay, do not use your phones. Please take pictures. Okay. Okay, so after 3 years of COVID, after getting out of COVID, what do we have for breakfast?
I figure
Gone? Anything else? Okay, that could be heavy, but okay. All right, it's okay. So I was fortunate enough to be given by Prof that actually talk about the definition of sustainable resilient food systems. So let's go. First definition, sustainable food systems. So there are keywords there. Encompass. What do you understand by encompass? Encompass. All right. A range of actors, interlinked, value-adding activities involved in production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food. So for the one who ate eggs, have you thought about the production, processing, and disposal of your eggshells? Okay. Food products that originate from agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and parts of a broader economic, societal, natural environment in which they're embedded. A food system that delivers food security and nutrition in a way, okay, for all, in such a way that it is economical, socially inclusive, environmentally friendly, and generates food security and nutrition. We are all together, right? It's a lesson, but it's a lesson that we must have.
He's teaching.
So what does this mean? We talk about economics. Are eggs economical? Yes, they are. Are chicken sausages economical? Who knows? She said, yes, they are economical. All right, socially sustainable. When we talk about socially sustainable, what are we thinking of? What are we thinking of when we talk about socially sustainable? We're talking about gender, equity, right? We're talking about all these issues that get me and you interacting and being in a context. Someone is reading it.
No, sorry, taking things on the budget.
Oh, geez, I'm a walker. I am so sorry, I am a walker. Okay, I can use that. So can I switch this off? Okay. We have heard a lot about the environment this last 2 days. We have heard a lot about the environment. We've heard a lot about infrastructure. So when we talk about environment, are we actually considering food systems within that context? So for those, remember, there is going to be a quiz at the end. And I have tried to unpack some of the key terms in this definition. So I hope you have jotted these things down, okay? Let's move on to these 3 different pillars that we spoke about: economics, social, environment. Okay. For the economics, we talk about profitability, we talk about jobs, we talk about market linkages. We talked about tax. How many of us are actually paying our tax right now?
All of us are paying.
We talk about food supply and the food supply chain.
Whether we work or not.
Okay. So for the environment, we talk about the carbon footprint, water footprint. We've got health, animal health and plant health. Nowadays, we talk about One Health concept, where we talk about human, soil, animal, environment, plant, we talk about all these systems. Food losses and waste, biodiversity and toxicity. The social impact, added value, right? To whom? Added value to whom? Women and children. And let's not leave the men behind, eh? Okay. Indigenous people, cultural heritage, nutrition, workers' rights. Do we consider workers' rights when we think about food systems? Because at the end of the day, when it's in our plate, we really don't care where it's coming from. But then the person behind the production of that food is still important. Okay. I'm not saying don't eat what you want just because, but we need to be conscious of these things. We come to food system resilience. The capacity over time, there's a time element. Okay. For a food system and its unit at multiple levels, right? And for me, I would want to talk about scale from a plot, farm, landscape, region, country, to provide sufficient, appropriate, and accessible food to all in the face of various and even unforeseen disturbances. Okay, so the key features: wider range of stresses and disturbances. So it's supposed to be able to withstand those things. Occur at multiple levels of food security. So at the smaller scale to the bigger scale, and function objectively for a purpose, not just because there's KFC by the end of the road, we all go there just because. It has to function objectively for healthy and nutritious food. In Zimbabwe, I think we all know what would be the top thing here in terms of some of the severe crises. We talk about economic crisis, talk about political crisis. Now we're talking about ESCOM crisis. Then we've got pests and diseases. We've got climate change. And at where and what are we supposed to be building resilience, right? It's about sustainability, not sustaining something at the lowest bar, right? It's about geographical region, it's about frequency, scales, and actually addressing multiple stresses. So we've all captured this, right? My mini lecture. I'm gonna do another lecture, but for this one, it's about the definitions. I'm sensitizing you about what food systems are, resilient food systems, and sustainable food systems. So moving on to the next presentation. Give me a second. Sorry. Okay. What's this?
But it is worth having a look at the budgets that are flowing and to see where they can be mainstream. And then lastly, underpinning all of this would be an effective monitoring and evaluation system that tracks implementation of adaptation action and the effectiveness. Otherwise, we might not be learning from mistakes, or we might be undertaking activities that in the end actually do not
Sorry,
have
guys.
any positive adaptation impact.
Change your voices.
Just to end.
So my job right now is to tell you that, to tell you the obvious, things that you obviously know already. But I'm going to try and convince you that you don't know enough of it, and that I know what more than you guys. But in essence, you probably know far more than I do. But I'll try my best, and let's meet each other halfway. Okay. Yes, whilst we deal with the technicalities. Is that showing? Okay, so what is food? Right, food is any substance consumed by any organism for nutritional purposes, for nutritional support. If I ask my mom what is food, she'll say food is what gets into my belly and makes me full. Other definitions talk about substances consisting of essential proteins, minerals, etc., that allow the body of an organism to sustain growth, right? Then any nourishing substance, that's another definition. When I was asking you what you ate in the morning, I kind of like came up with all these pictures with different types of foods. And these perhaps could be something that he's working on it. Sorry. Yes, technology sometimes, gets the best of us. No idea. Okay. Someone can have just a cup of coffee and they're okay. And for them, that's breakfast. Someone could have a whole buffet of nuts and vegetables. And for them, that's what they want. That's food for them. In many less privileged and marginalized places, you have nsima and your vegetables. And they wake up and they go. And that is what they have, right? And for us, we're not saying that is okay, but this is what they have. But this is also a reflection of the system that we are calling the food system, where in some instances it's plentiful, and in some instances it's not. So we can represent the food system in a
somewhat less sophisticated manner. I think we've gone through the definition, where it has all these hours in and out. It talks about the actors, it talks about the connections, right? Who's who in the zoo depends with where you learn on this thing. But as well, we talk about the drivers, the biophysical drivers, the territorial drivers. We talk about infrastructure and technology, political and governance, socioeconomic, and the demographics. But in actual fact, the food system is not as simply put. This is how it often looks like: chaos. And within this chaos are the marginalized, are the less privileged and the more vulnerable people. We don't feel this chaos. This is kind of like hidden from us. And in some instances, we are part of this chaos. What are the challenges to food systems? Talk about efficiency. Food losses, waste, very, very long value chains, right? We talk about linkages that are too long, from one actor to the next, from one delivery point to the next. We talk about low resource use efficiencies. We talk about equity. We know this, point in case in South Africa, the dichotomous systems that are there in terms of food security. You've got those that can afford and have, and those that don't and cannot afford. Issues of gender, youth, and race. Is it balanced? There are sometimes 7 years of plentiful and 7 years of famine. It's something that we cannot avoid, but it is what it is, because this is the system. We had floods, a series of floods. Before floods, there were droughts. Before then, yeah, bumper harvest, but it's cyclical, okay? Sustainability. Again, I did mention, do we want low production but sustainable? Or do you want variable production? Or do you want high sustainable productivity within the systems? Issues of resilience, which is something that came out in the last definition. Over time, effects of climate, economic, and environmental shocks. And is it inclusive? Issues of governance, issues of agency, the power to choose, right? Again, we talk about gender, youth, and the disabled. So why should we care about the food system? I have a small video. I hope it will play. Is it going to play? Sound. The snippet I took from YouTube that talked about there's no sound. It's a short 1-minute video. Okay. The video talked about this community where it's a community that had a lot of disabled people. And it was during COVID and they had no access to food. So the local governance structures provided them with a vegetable garden. But they provided them with a vegetable garden, but they didn't give them all the necessary equipment for them to actually run the garden. But bit by bit, they provided like tanks, watering cans and that. But issues of sustainability, issues of whether this thing was actually sustainable and if they were going to feed their families were what was in question. But it talked about something that was so close to home, that it was a community that was not too far away from Durban, but the issues of food security were so ripe in there, and COVID had exposed these inequalities. It unfortunately can't play. So my presentation right now is just going to focus on this woman. She's a woman from the rural areas. As you can see, the landscape itself tells you that it's quite arid. She's using a hoe to till her land, and she's probably a granny of 5. And for her, her main source of food is her garden. So I'm talking about the rural farmer. So we want these farmers to be front and center in saying that we want to know where our food comes from. We want to be part of the system to produce, process, and market our food. But how do we get them there? So what can we do to transition sustainable rural agriculture and food systems? So I'm going to present a list of possible actions that we can do in here, in the projects that we are in the communities that we are in, or in the institutes that we are in. First and foremost, let's do a better job at understanding the context. The who, the what, the when, the why, and how. Let's create platforms for open and inclusive dialogues across all actors within the food system. That means even the lady that I showed previously, she needs to be part of the conversation. Okay. Let's quantify existing gaps, resources, knowledge, and capacity. Often, as institutes, we are a solution looking for a problem. So we come in with all the solutions, but we do not understand what the problem is and what the gaps are. So let us be there to understand what these gaps are. It is important to do act and stakeholder mapping. This helps us to understand issues of power and influence. So that lady who's in this garden, does she actually have the power to change her circumstance? And does she have influence? And obviously policy mapping for agency and behavior change. Number 2, let's modernize rural production systems. What do I mean by that? I'm part of a project called Harnessing Appropriate Scale Farm Mechanization, and this is happening in Zimbabwe and South Africa, where we are mapping what machinery is best suited for where. And we're not talking about big 4-wheel John Deere tractors. We're talking about small tractors, 2-wheel tractors with their little trailers. We're talking about threshers. We're talking about reapers. Things that fit within the context of rural farmers, mapped where they are more applicable. This helps with the aging farming population that's currently there. It increases efficiency, shortens and at times lengthens the actors and the market linkages that are there, incentivizes youths that are the majority of the unemployed and women. But for this to succeed, we need partnerships. Let's talk about digitalization of agriculture. A lot of people think about it just providing a smartphone to a farmer. No, it goes beyond that. Let's create tailor-made advisory apps and information bundled for those hard to reach places, yes. Partner with government and also service providers to provide things like SMSs, videographies, even dramas in the hard to reach places so that farmers can get the necessary advice to actually improve their circumstances. Let's not leave anyone behind. Let's encourage diversity. And this diversity that I'm talking about goes beyond just at the plot level. We're talking about multi-stakeholder dialogues at a point. We talk about technical and operational diversity. Increase, it could be like mixed crop and livestock systems. It could be incorporating underutilized crop species, or even merging traditional production systems where they actually fit. Core construction of a better and more suitable rural agriculture and food system. So instead of
When's that? When's that? What am I?
apologies. Let's promote bi-directional learning. How many farmers are in here? May I please ask? Okay. No. I'm not talking about farmers who have transcended and doing smart, self-born smart farming. No. I'm talking about people who get down and dirty in the. So we don't have any farmers here. But you do have access to Pick and Pay, right? So no. Have we not left the most important beneficiary or the most important partner in these conversations? Yes, we do tend to get a bit technical, but they need to be part of the conversation. They need to be part of finding the solutions for themselves. So I talk about infusion of cultures, and these cultures are beyond the cultures that we know, the social cultures. We're talking about even institutional cultures. Inclusivity. Like I said, let's not leave anyone behind. Let our interventions be people-centered or human-centered. It's not about trying to have a building erected in the middle of Bulindlela when on top of a hill, when no one can actually get to the top of the hill. It has to be by the people, for the people. I know this is something that was mentioned by the previous speaker, how it is so difficult to foster public and private partnerships. But it doesn't mean that we should stop trying. We need to keep going, because that is the only way we can have support and buy-in from everyone. And again, it has to be feed for scale. We've got the global, we've got the national, and we've got the local. But again, food systems currently operate at a very large scale. And we leave a lot of people, that woman with the hoe behind, because at the end of the day, there is no way she can tap into the existing food systems. Let's localize some of these things to reduce the distances between actors so that she also can participate and be a prosperous actor within this food system. So the question becomes, can we actually create sustainable rural agricultural food systems? Is this a pipe dream? In the morning session, there was a lot that was talked about behavior change. But how do we foster behavior change? Are we talking about the carrot, the stick, or are we going to preach the message to death? Often as projects or as initiatives, we talk about the carrot, incentives. Do this so that I can do this for you. Others create stringent policies to then say, no, if you don't do this, you'll be fined by this. Then there's others like me who preach you to death. I'll come repeatedly with the same message, hoping that there's going to be one who will be converted. And whose priorities are we addressing? Are we addressing our own priorities or the farmers' priorities? I think this is something that is up for debate. And what goes hand in hand with that is whose rhetoric? We talk about how fragile our food systems are, but sometimes when you go into these communities, have you seen how happy they are? So let's go down to basics. and understand what the food system is for the people that we are serving. So let's dream and make it a reality, one stone at a time and one conversation at a time. Thank you. So it's time for the quiz now.
First, I must have the panelists. They're all ex-UKZN. Dr. Dirwa is here. Can you come and sit here? Dr. Ngidi already there. Nopai, are you here? Yeah, you're not a panelist. Yeah. All right. So there's Dr. Wimbai, Dr. Ngidi, Dr. Tinashe Dirwai of IMI. These are two of them are our former students. So it's nice to see. Yes. So before I give over to the panelists, I wanted to bring up to speed what Wimbai has summarized. She is describing future food systems for the people, for the planet, for prosperity. You need to worry about people, what they eat. You need to worry about the planet, what the food system is doing, the environmental footprint. You need to make money, prosperity. And you touched on a very important point, food waste. I remember when I was giving my professorial chair meeting, I read somewhere where it says, food wasted on the table in America is enough to feed people in Africa for the whole year. Can you imagine how much food waste and what food waste does to the environment, greenhouse emissions? So it's very important that you raise those questions in a holistic manner, that you are designing food system for the planet, for people, and for prosperity. So you did a good job, and you touched some of the ingredients of that kind of future food system we desire to build sustainable, resilient. So I used to have a boss, Lucien, I used to have a boss who said, talking too much is not solving problems, isn't it? So I need to shut up. So what do? I open it for discussion, and nobody said she's not presenting. Oh, you're presenting? Oh no, we didn't see you on the program, so. All right, so come over. It's your thing.
I was kidnapped.
Okay.
Do you have my presentation? Okay. Afternoon, colleagues. I was hoping not to speak at my own show. Hence, I was not on the program, but apparently I've been hijacked and brought back. So I'm going to try and contextualize some of what Wimbai was presenting within the context of what the uMngeni Resilience Project has actually done in terms of food systems, how we've gone about working with farmers in the rural areas, and the sort of ethos that has been guiding that work and engagement that we've been doing. Is the presentation coming? Oh, you know, last year I was at the ecological infrastructure in Durban. They had similar technological challenges, and I ended up just having to talk through my keynote presentation without the slides. I hope you won't do that to me again today. I really worked hard to put those slides together at last minute. Are they coming? Or you can bring, oh, I don't have my. No, apologies for that. I just finished making my slides like 5 minutes ago. But yeah, just to start talking before the presentation comes on board. When you saw the farmers yesterday when you went to Skwaimani, and even when you went to Vulindlela and KwaZulu-Natal, whilst the interventions that we did sort of differed in terms of focus between the communities, agriculture was more or less common because all the people farm for subsistence purposes. Skwaimani was the main pilot area for the agricultural interventions. That's the main issue that we were driving there. In Vulindlela, it was mostly the ecological infrastructure work, the wet, the wetlands rehabilitation, grasslands, and so forth. But there was also a small component of agriculture that was done in Vulindlela. And there it focused mostly, we established a garden or two at the beginning of the project and installed a few tunnels in the area as well. So it was mostly directed at boosting household food security and nutrition through increasing access to diverse and nutrient-dense crops at the household level. A similar approach was taken in KwaZulu-Natal, where the focus in KwaZulu-Natal was more on the built infrastructure. That's where we are targeting to strengthen houses and also clearing a bit of alien invasive species and so forth. But there as well, we established, I think, about 10 community gardens and also supported household gardens. Again, the focus there was more geared towards increasing access to diverse and nutritious food at the household level, and also dealing with crops that have low water requirement and that are adapted to the terrain and the environment. We spoke about integrating indigenous and scientific knowledge. And how they are now marketing Madumbe. They even had a contract with Save Hyper at some point. So a major part of it was also related to, promoting underutilized indigenous and traditional crops and profiling them and integrating the knowledge at the household level in terms of how people have always produced and conserved these crops, and then integrating them into the broader food system through a range of supporting activities, some of which they mentioned yesterday around capacity development and so forth. Is it coming? Really? Does anyone have a memory stick? Oh, just bring your laptop. I'm just going to swap laptops here. Huh? No, this is not a memory stick, it's an adapter. So I'm going to connect that laptop here. Huh? Also, it was just a matter of not having an adapter.
They say power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts more.
Now today, I made this presentation in like
They don't want to still have time.
We still have time, yeah. Yeah, so I just thought it would be good to take people through, the visual aspects of the work that was done, as opposed to getting another speech from myself. Yeah, now I'm going to continue. Okay, so essentially, okay, let me start talking in the deep science of it. So when you talk of sustainable and resilient food systems, she gave a lot of the theoretical concepts and what, but we're essentially talking about issues of equity, issues of inequality. There are final issues of dignity related to the people and their participation in food systems. There are issues of social justice in terms of redress, correcting the power imbalances within the food system. There are also issues to do with environmental sustainability in terms of shifting the current trajectory of the global food system towards greater sustainability. So if people followed the UN Food System Summit a few years back, one of the things that strongly came out of that summit was that the current global or industrialized food system is unsustainable. It is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. It is driving environmental degradation. In Southern Africa, recently when we were updating the climate change strategy for the region, we identified land use changes as one of the major drivers of environmental degradation and greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of those land use changes were driven by agriculture, expansion in agriculture, people cutting down trees to produce crops, and all of those sort of things related to the need to produce food. From a policy perspective, we did an analysis of policies in the agriculture or food security space, policies in the environment space, and policies in the health space, just to see if these sectors were speaking together, because we need them to be coherent if we are going to achieve sustainability. What we realized was there is a major issue of incoherence, and a lot of the incoherence comes from the fact that in South Africa and the region where we are located, we are still trying to address socioeconomic issues related to poverty, inequality, unemployment, issues of dignity and so forth because of our history. So a lot of government initiatives are aimed at addressing those. In that context, agriculture is also seen as a key driver to addressing unemployment, inequality, and poverty, as well as boosting food security within poor rural communities. So what we saw was that a focus or a stronger focus on agriculture and food space, because we are now opening up new lands. You've got people encroaching into wetlands. Many times I've been invited by departments of agriculture to come in and assess or do a feasibility study for small scale gardens that they want to start. And they'll often take me to a wetland and say, here is where we want to do the garden. And it's always a battle to say, we cannot establish a garden in a wetland. In some instances, you might not be able to see that it is a wetland because it has now been badly degraded. So it might not look like a wetland anymore, but if you look at the vegetation that might still remain, it will show you that this area is actually a wetland, just that it has been damaged because of human activities. And what that then does is when you compromise on that, you also then create trade-offs in the health space of people. because ultimately people are not going to be able to derive all the functions for a healthy environment that they're supposed to have. And you get issues of breakouts or malnutrition and so forth. So you get these trade-offs across these three areas of agriculture, environment, and health. So when we come in and say we want to talk about sustainable and resilient food systems and so forth, it's basically saying we want to bring in harmony those three sectors more broadly and more meaningfully. So coming to my presentation and what I was telling you about, the issue of trade-offs and balancing them is basically saying one hand must feed the other. So we don't need one hand that is always feeding itself. We need to have that balance. So how have we gone about it in the uMngeni Resilience Project? So part of it, we spoke about community-based approaches. So at the heart of communities is diversity. Diversity in people, diversity in actors, diversity in partnerships. So at the beginning, we had to undertake an assessment to understand what was that diversity that was there, who were the actors who were there, what were they doing, what were they contributing, and also understanding the power dynamics amongst those actors, because, you know, if you've ever read Animal Farm, not all animals are equal. You know, some animals are more equal than others. So it also happens when you get into a community and there are different role players. Some role players are more equal than others, and they tend to have a larger say in what actually happens on the ground. So we understood that. We also went to look at the diversity within their existing cropping systems. What crops were they currently utilizing at different scales of importance? Which ones were they just growing for subsistence, consumption? Which ones were they growing for cash crops? So in Swaimane in particular, at the time we got there, there'd been a massive expansion in sugarcane because of subcontracting from surrounding commercial farmers. So they were contracting smallholder farmers to become sugarcane producers. It made sense for smallholder farmers because they would come prepare the land, plant for you, give you inputs, but it would lock their land into sugarcane for a very long time. And it actually wasn't very profitable for them because afterwards, when they harvest and they deduct all the expenses, I remember at the beginning, one farmer saying he got less than 100 Rand after everything was deducted. So it really wasn't paying off for them. It seemed attractive because they were going to have everything done for them, but it was not giving them meaningful returns. It was also impacting on their own household food insecurity because they had lost land which they used to use for own production and own food consumption. So now they had to purchase food, and at the same time, they had declining incomes. We did some surveys at the beginning to understand the food nutrition status of the community. Njabu like this. So we did some studies on food access and reasons for food choices. And basically, we wanted to understand where do they obtain the food that they eat and how do they make the choice about the food on the plate that they consume at night or for dinner. We realized that because of the shifting patterns in the agriculture space, they were accessing most of their food now from supermarkets, and those supermarkets were in Wartburg, which also created an issue that they had to go to Wartburg, catch a taxi, buy food and so forth. And because most of them don't have fridges and those sort of things, then they cannot buy fresh vegetables because they can't hold the fresh vegetables. So it was easier to just buy things like sam, beans, rice that you don't need to store in a fridge or something like that. So it was also narrowing the diversity of their food. So that was an issue of access. And I think I've mentioned the reasons behind that were mostly economic reasons that were driving the food choices. And linked to that, we did a food nutrition status of the community. And we realized that there was a high burden of hunger and malnutrition. A high proportion of them, were at a risk of hunger. And this is something that we did a few years later, where we then superimposed some data on depression and so forth, and actually found that there's a direct linkage between hunger and anxiety and depression. We usually say, a hungry person is an angry person, but it's more that a hungry person is actually an anxious and likely to be depressed person. So it was important to understand all of these things because they come into informing that behavioral change and, shifting the system. At the same time that we were working with the farmers towards the end, the COVID-19 pandemic came in 2020, and it really set us back. We thought we were making progress in terms of getting the farmers closer to where we wanted them to be, and it set us back several steps. The inequalities that had always been there came to the fore and became really obvious. I always tell people, you see, this thing that I was telling you, that they have to go to Wartburg to buy their food. And so when there was a lockdown and public transport was not moving, they could not make that trip as easily. For us people in the suburbs, most of us, we were still able to get to Pick and Pay in our usual supermarkets and access food as per normal. But for them, it was cut off. Another thing also was the trucks, the middlemen who come and buy vegetables from them for resale in the cities were unable to come and buy. So even if they had surplus to sell and make money, they could not convert that surplus into cash. And they also did not have storage to store the surplus. So it was, it was a very different situation there. And it mostly affected those poor households. And this diagram is just summarizing what I was talking about in terms of the agriculture, health, food policy mismatch that we were talking about, or that I was giving you examples of, and how we understood that in the context of the project. So in the context of the project, we understood it in the sense that at a national level, there's a disconnect with the local level. Hence, as a project, we took a focus to start from the bottom up and focus on strengthening local food systems, strengthening the local food environment and the capacity of farmers to be able to produce for themselves, and then boost their productivity to be able to sell the surplus. Our vision in doing this was to say, within these communities, how can we develop a fit for purpose local food system that reflects the people, that reflects the agrobiodiversity, that they have their heritage, their culture, and which is led by them. And I'm glad yesterday I heard people saying when they got to Squaimani, the farmer said to one of my staff, stop talking, let us tell you. So that shows that aspect where we say led by the farmers, that they led and we came in and supported in certain areas. Whilst we were building from the bottom up and empowering farmers, we were also cognizant of global approaches in terms of what we want to achieve at a broader level in terms of food and agriculture. And I'll touch on this if you come tomorrow. I'll speak on scaling and upscaling into policy. So it's important to have that approach, that whilst you build from the bottom up, you need to have the global perspective because you're scaling up. So what we are doing at a local level is actually called deep scaling, where we are piloting and building the evidence base to support something. That is deep scaling. What we are doing next, when we're saying we want to go to other areas or we've been in other areas, that is outscaling, that is replication. And then the next level is upscaling, that is speaking into policy, where you now want to make systemic change. That's the sustainability aspect. So you need to dip out, then up. So you need to have all of those. Otherwise, it doesn't just come together at the end if you didn't have it together at the beginning. Okay. One of the things that I spoke about is the issue of underutilized indigenous and traditional crops. I gave an example of amadumbe. It is important to understand the context under which these crops fall within. We are coming from a very rich background where, history tells us that we had up to about 500,000 plant species, with more than 30,000 of them having been recorded as edible, which means people ate them at some point in time. Of those 7,000, people actually grew them in their gardens and spaces at some point. But over time, especially in the 19th and 20th centuries, that went down to just 20 crops, providing 90% of our calorific intake. And in the 21st century, of that, wheat, maize, and rice actually dominate the space. So there are basically 3 crops that feed the world. Now, whilst this has worked in some ways in terms of alleviating hunger at a broader scale, it has also created vulnerabilities in the system because we have eroded the genetic diversity that underpinned system resilience. So when we lost diversity, we lost system resilience. And for small farmers who were reliant on mixed farming systems, it increased their vulnerability. So from a point when they were growing 5 crops, and now they just have 1 crop in the field, the example I was giving you that now they just had sugarcane, and you can't eat sugarcane. So if anything happens, it immediately impacts your stomach. So you're more vulnerable than in the past. When I was growing up and going to the rural areas to see my grandmother, there would be maize, there would be millets, there would be sorghum, there would be the sweet sorghum, which we loved as kids because you can just, we call it African bubble gum because you can just chew it anytime. In that same field, you would have bottle gourds growing, you would have pumpkins growing, you would have the spiked cucumber also growing there. And those are things that you could actually eat at any time. You would harvest the pumpkin leaves and eat them as a relish, very rich source of iron and calcium. So there were all of these things that were happening. So that even if you had a bad season and the maize failed, you still had another source of cereals. You still had your millets, you still had your sorghum, you still had other things. So we now talk about balanced diets and all of those things, dietary diversity. They were there. It's not a new concept. It's a concept that we lost at some point, and now it's very expensive to bring it back, that concept. So we wanted to sort of like turn this triangle upside down again and bring back the diversity that has been lost within these systems, but also understanding that we are living in a different era now. So we can't have it the way it was, but we can mimic the desirable attributes that used to be there. So we took several underutilized crops and we used them to future-proof local food systems where we were working. And we targeted underutilized crops such as Bambara groundnut, the amadumbe, cowpea, sorghum, things that we knew grow naturally and have been there before in these communities, things that we knew that they possess tolerances to the extremes that are experienced in these areas, and that could also support other life, the ecosystem that I was talking about. So we, the birds have to eat. So you have to think of the birds as well indirectly. I know farmers are always chasing birds and so forth, but you know, they are part of the system that we serve. We also, knowing what we now knew about their nutritional status in these communities, we also made sure that these crops or this basket of crops that we were supporting the farmers to produce were also linked to improving nutrition and health within these communal areas, and also within some wild or natural spaces. So we started a program within our research group that we titled Forests, Foraging and Food, where we wanted to sort of reinstate the old traditions of foraging and the role that forests play as a source of food, not just a source of firewood and so forth. So we started this thematic area on forests, foraging and food, and it has actually grown quite significantly and led to a whole flagship project that was called Wood Rights. It was a strategic initiative that was funded by the university, really to expand on that concept, because sometimes the relationship of people with the environment needs to be just repositioned. So instead of looking at forests and so forth as an impediment or an inconvenience where they need to cut them down so that they can grow crops, we just needed to sort of shift the perspective to say, you can actually use these forests as a source of food. The understory in these forests can produce food, and you can source many other food types in these areas. So there's no need to clear it to make way for food. There is food already within the forest system. Now comes the hard part. So the hard part was mainstreaming these crops. We talk of, market linkages. How do we really take them from the field into the house, onto the plate? One of the things that we experienced early in the project with cowpea in particular, we got farmers to produce it. They produced a whole lot of it, and then they called me and said, we've got your cowpea. When are you coming? And I said, my cowpea, it's not mine, it's your cowpea. He said, what should we do with it? I said, eat it. I said, how? So then I remembered working with a community in KwaZulu-Natal and Chanini, where they were growing cowpeas quite, on a large scale. So went there, got the farmers, put them on a bus. They came over to Skwaimani, and we had a day of cooking. So we brought farmers who were still utilizing this crop, who still had the local or indigenous knowledge of how to utilize this crop. And we brought them to other farmers, because it was not for me to tell them how to use this crop. It was for other farmers like them in similar circumstances to tell them the story and reinstate the knowledge that had been lost in that community. So they came, the whole day, they cooked different recipes of cowpea, more than I ever imagined were possible. And they spent the day eating. And some of the older ladies that day were able to recall that, when we were growing up, this used to be here. And then somewhere along the years, and then they mentioned, what's that saying that the Sangoma can't see now because he ate the cowpea? I'm forgetting the, what is it? No, Sangoma. Yeah, Sangoma. Yeah. So there's that traditional aspect that says, if you're a Sangoma and you eat cowpea, you lose your powers of seeing into the future. So if you have aspirations of being a Sangoma, eating cowpeas might not be a desirable thing for you. But fortunately, not everyone, wants to be a Sangoma. But it was interesting getting the history from them and them exchanging the knowledge. And we're able to document it. And we've got these pamphlets that we've come up with as a result of those exchanges, where we have now documented what the crop is, how do you prepare it, and how do you use it. And we're fortunate enough to get our dietitians to come in and take those dishes, take them to the lab and quantify the nutritional value of those dishes and benchmark it with a meal maybe that is, rice and beans, and say, okay, what if we substitute the beans with cowpea or bambara? What would be the added nutritional benefit? So we've been able to do those things. Before COVID kicked in, we were actually planning to have a cooking competition. We're probably still going to do it because the concept note is there in my folders. We wanted to bring, she's called Chef something. Wendy's gone, but her name is Chef. She's a very fancy celebrity chef who cooks, traditional, Chef Mpume, I think. Yeah. So we're going to bring her and, we'd have a cook-off competition. Farmers would come, cook their dishes with these crops. She would cook hers, and there would be like, in my kitchen rules kind of thing, where we would sample those, African traditional dishes. But it was just meant to celebrate the heritage of these crops and try to reinstate the pride and dignity associated with consuming these crops. So we thought bringing in someone who's a celebrity chef can help change perceptions around these crops and shift them from being poor people's crops to just being fun crops and nutritious crops that everyone can enjoy. And one of the things that we took from the URP, and we have almost successfully piloted in eThekwini, was to then explore how we can use open spaces as nutrition hubs. So when I mentioned that wood rights project, so we took the local production that we piloted in Swaimani, and we took that, because now in peri-urban areas like you have in eThekwini and so forth, they don't have land, the 2 hectares or so, but there are some open spaces. So I wanted to see how can you use those open spaces to be nutrition hubs so that people can grow different sort of crops that are multifunctional. And to do that and to design that, there was a lot of science. To do that, to get into that multifunctional spaces and to use these crops in those spaces, we had to undertake this study where we mapped the documented range of ecosystem services that these crops can actually provide. So this is a paper, it's been published in Frontiers somewhere there, where we then documented. So these are not things that I was thumb sucking. These are things that we obtained from the published literature, documenting the various uses of these indigenous crops. And this confirmed our hypothesis that we'd always had, that these crops that we were promoting actually promote a more ecologically friendly type of agriculture that contributes to a broader range of ecosystem services, not just the provisioning. Because you see, I was talking to you about food and nutrition. That's just one item out of a range of other services that you actually derive from promoting and reintroducing these crops back into society. And then, of course, for the fun of it, we linked it to the SDGs, because at a national and more global level, you need to link them to the global agenda. So that's just taking the local into the global space. Now, the next thing that we did was to then take those range of ecosystem services and look at the sustainable livelihoods framework and say, now, can these crops, with their broad range of ecosystem services, support sustainable livelihood outcomes? And again, so the thickness in those lines represents how many published papers we were able to find that confirm that relationship. So again, it was not me sucking my thumbs and drawing things. That is a scientific process. So we used this to inform that plan around greening spaces and, forests, foraging and food. And these are all things that are coming out of the work that we were doing with farmers. So a lot of us was, when we have conversations with farmers about these crops and they say, this crop, we use it to treat stomach ailments, we use it for this. What we then go and do afterwards is to go and trace that back using, our science to try and confirm what the farmers were saying, and then bring it back to them to say, actually, this is it, what you were saying is here, and there are these other benefits as well that we've been able to pick in that system. So we were able to address not just, crops and food in Skwaimani, but we were able to address soil health. We were able to address issues of the carbon footprint in terms of reducing the carbon footprint of agriculture by getting them to practice more ecologically friendly types of agriculture, reducing input use through encouraging practices that encourage retention of nutrients in the soil water conservation, and mixing crops, introducing legumes back into the system, which were able to fix nitrogen, improve soil structure. So all of those, improving the environmental footprint of agriculture within that system. And these are some of the things that we want to scale up at a landscape level. Here we're doing it in a particular ward, in a rural area. We want to scale this up at a landscape level. And the importance of diversification in community nutrition. And again, these are things that we measured and quantified in Skwaimani with the farmers towards the end of the project. I think in 2020-21, we did a survey. I think it was just before COVID kicked in. We did a survey there, and it basically confirmed. So, when we write the GCF, we talk about core benefits and, mitigation. So we took that kind of thinking to say, what other core benefits are there from doing this type of interventions? So there are climate health core benefits of using underutilized crops. There are climate environment core benefits, and there are climate socioeconomic core benefits of using these crops. And again, linking these more broadly, the agrobiodiversity, environment, and farmers and community, we realized that we were able to address key areas of health and nutrition. So over time, through the diversification that we introduced, the improved access to nutrient-dense foods, and also the knowledge of how to prepare and utilize these crops, we're able to address those things. We're also able to address broader socio-ecological systems issues around, the system, diversifying it through and with local farmers, addressing health again and improving their livelihoods. So that's just a summary of the outcomes that we achieved through the range of interventions that we did in Skwaimani. And this, the picture at the bottom there is actually that day that I was telling you, when the farmers came and they were preparing cowpeas. So that's them there, preparing cowpeas and getting ready for that food exchange. The other picture on top is just one of the gardens, which is now more diverse than before. And that there at the end is, I normally call them horrendograms, but it's just a causal loop diagram which summarizes how the different aspects of the system, including the early warning system that we had, which was providing farmers with improved access to climate information and services, agro-advisory, in terms of when to plant, when not to be in the field, that sort of information that helped them manage better. I've always argued that when we talk of climate smart farming, the part that makes it climate smart is when you link the climate information into it. If you are not linking the climate information into it, you just have a bundle of practices that have always existed. So everything there is it's stuff, no one has invented anything new in that realm. It's things that have always been there. It becomes climate smart when you're able to link the climate information to then inform the choice and timing. You heard the mama yesterday talking about having a crop calendar. So that is linking climate information so that they have a crop calendar that says at this time of the year, we can plant here, we can plant these crops. We should expect to harvest it around this time. Around this time, we plant this other different crop. So then it makes sense. Otherwise, you can give them the diverse seeds, you can diversify the system, but if you don't link the climate information, you don't improve the decision-making and they really don't reap those rewards. So this is just a summarization of all of those things that were there, investments in community capacity for localized farming trade. If I'd done this without Umama Magwaza, people would have thought I'm telling stories. But for those who were here yesterday, she spoke to all of these things. She spoke about the capacity building, how it improved their local capabilities, the economic growth from being able to access markets. So all of those things that were done seemingly independent were not really independent. They were actually linked because there was a deliberate approach that informed their timing and design. So again, empower local communities to produce own food. Those are training sessions that we would have with farmers in the fields and so forth. We call them farmer field school days. That's just summarizing, our approach around nutrition and health, agriculture, community development. We also had a very strong focus on youth. We started a youth group in Swaimani, where we got youth involved in agriculture. I'm happy to say a lot of them are still involved in agriculture. I continuously meet them in different platforms where they're now able to attend on their own without us taking them there. It's always encouraging bumping into them. I see some of them posting on social media. One of them has started like an agritourism kind of thing. I think you remember, Mike, we had one of our Christmas parties at Tandapakati's house, where we had the dance group and so forth. And she's got tourists who come to live in those huts and experience the village life and so forth. So it's been a joy being involved in a lot of those things. The next step is really how we upscale this into the policy space. We have some key recommendations about what needs to be done. We'll share some of those tomorrow when we talk more about the policy space. Otherwise, thank you very much, colleagues. That was the case study.
This gentleman surprises me when he talks. I don't know how you organize yourself. Because yesterday I was saying, is this what they got 7.5 million to show us 3 gardens? But now I'm convinced what that man was used for. Because I was really worried that you use 7.5 million to 15 million. See these gardens, 3 of them, and some mulch and some lightning detector. But now you unpacked it. And there was a lot which we were going to go away without knowing. And you really tell us that this is money well spent. We'll give him a clap of hands. It's good you came and clarified. there's something you talked which is very important about diet diversity and healthy diets. And I think if you talk about health diets and non-communicable diseases, we are picking up as Africa on non-communicable diseases, stroke, cancer, and obesity. So if I look around, I can head count people who are obese, and it's a serious thing. It's one of the fatal killers, premature death, more than tobacco, alcohol, and unsafe sex. So it's really a thing which is coming on the continent. We used to think of obesity as a thing of Europe, Middle East, China, but here in Africa, obesity is a big thing. So the food system you're talking about, it's not just feeding people, but nourishing people properly. So you're talking about legumes, root crops, cereals, and this is a diverse diet, the vegetables, fruits, and so on. So this is what we're looking for, a diet which nourishes people, which doesn't make people too obese, too prone to cancer, heart stroke, and all these kind of things. This is very important. And you also talked about vulnerability of food systems, the COVID thing. It's very important that this stresses recur, COVID, influenza, and so forth. And we have to see, and I liked where you distinguish between local and industrial food systems, where you reduce the food miles between this, where you want to reinforce the local food system versus going to Waterberg and buy hamburgers and all these kind of things, come and put weight and eat oil food and you have all this kind of. So you really unpacked a lot of important things. Now, I was going home to say, hey, come on, man, what were these guys doing with that 7.5 million? Is this all these gardens I saw? Ah, come on, there's something more. We thank you very much for unpacking. You'd given the hidden part of the project now, which he had saved for us to see towards the end. So I would like to thank you very much for delving into that detail and telling us that this was money well spent. Thank you very much. Okay, talking too much is not solving a problem. This is our panelists, right? And before I turn over to them, I would like to see who has a question. If you don't have a question, I will volunteer you to ask a question. So yes, sir, at the back. Where are those young men with them?
Thank you very much. And thanks to Prof as well. I think it won't be a question, but it will be a comment in line with what you've just said now. Because one of the concerns I had as we were going around yesterday is that when I observed the projects were more of subsistence in nature. And it worried me in a country that has spent more than R1 trillion in trying to revive agriculture through land reform, post-settlement support, research, and everything. And data tells us to date, the black farmer output in all the commodities is still less than 5%. So it was a big concern when I was going around. But where Prof closed my mouth in is when he spoke about trade-offs and balancing off. Then it struck into my mind, because one of the observations that I've made over time, without quoting any literature, is that the resilience does breed low productivity in terms of yields. But there's a lot that we've got to learn from that. And I took it from the province where I come from, the province of the Eastern Cape, which is a livestock province. And one of the focuses that researchers put over time is to focus on the conservation of indigenous livestock breeds. And a very good example here is the Nguni breed, which is more than 10,000 years old, even older than the Christian religion, which I believe very much There's a lot of climate change information and strategies that we can learn from that. At the end, I think I'm more, what is this thing? Converted than I was earlier on. Thank you very much, Prof.
But come in.
I have an online question. Shane O'Donoghue, he asked, he said the European amazing outputs, how can we access these learning outcomes?
It's here, thank you, Prof, for a wonderful presentation. Giriboni here from agriculture, animal production to be specific. So I wanted to know, I know your work is focused more on crops. So what about livestock into the mix of diversifying the food system? So that's the first question. So the work that you were talking about, you talk about neglected and underutilized. And I feel like it's such a negative topic. So why not valuable yet underutilized? Because I think if we stick more to the negative side, we'll never bring those crops back into our food systems and into being the preferred crops for our people, because this debate has been ongoing on the issue of bringing cowpea and your sorghum to replace your traditional maize system into the food systems.
Oh, thank you very much, Prof. Mine, it was on the issue of sustainability, because on the presentation, you said another areas of sustainability is to address the issue of inequality and natural justice. So my question to you is that, do we have some other government department who are buying from those small scale farmers? Because remember, government is spending a lot of money in buying food for school nutrition and hospital and so on. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, colleagues, for the good presentations that helped us to understand both the concepts around sustainability of food systems, as well as the context in this particular project, which the last speaker presented. I think it's quite clear that the systems are quite broken, and if you also we see the same thing, that there's need to really get them to be sorted out. But what I would just want to request from Prof, the last speaker, is if they could at least probably document the processes so that we can understand how they try to make sure that they're developing a resilient system, food systems, because that is critical in terms of our learning as a global community. And that's what FAO's role is, to try and get all these experiences, benefit other parts of the world as well. So we would really appreciate if you can really kind of put the whole picture in clear, how exactly, what are the teething problems that you face in getting all the, because this is not easy to get partnerships around all the issues that you're raising. And also getting the language that she said, I think it's important also the negativity about, I think you used to call them orphaned crops, and things changed a bit and they're now called underutilized. And I think it's part of the messaging and part of the advocacy that is required to also change a bit to be positive about these foods that are very important. And as you know, this year is the year of the millets. it's recognizing the importance of the millets in the food systems, this broken food system that we are trying to mend. And the year of the millets is to make sure that we put the millets right on top. They've been part of the Africa food system way before maize came. So it's something that I think our messaging, our language also needs to change. You have been very creative and you came with so many other terms that I was seeing. I think you also can be creative and come up with better terms for these underutilized crops. Thank you.
I think this needs me to take off my jacket. Yeah, it's getting hot now. Yeah, I was just passing, minding my own business. Then I was invited to give a short talk now. I see, I'm feeling the heat. Okay. Okay. Public investment in agriculture. You should not worry about the role of smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers globally, or as we call them, small family farms, whilst they account for an average 15% of the arable land under production, they are producing around 35% of food on that area. So if you look at it from that perspective, in terms of how much land they've got and how much they are contributing from that land, it's actually a very sizable number. Global food security itself is mostly guaranteed and ensured through the activities of small family farms. If you go into Asia and other places, you really see how big their role is. Even here in Africa, how big that role is. And I think it's also a matter of terminology. When we, one of the things we did at the beginning of the uMngeni Resilience Project, I think I might do it again. We organized a day where we brought in different sorts of people like yourselves. And we played a game called Family Farmer Game. Mike, you were there, huh? Mike failed dismally as a small scale farmer. Like he made so many babies and but the purpose of that game is just to teach the complexity of managing a small family farm. The level of decisions that the so-called subsistence farmer has to make from meager resources, that on that small piece of land, they have to feed the family. They have to make extra money to send kids to school, save some for the next season, maybe also send some to their mother or whoever. So it's actually an enterprise, and it's just the size of the enterprise that we have to take into consideration. I like it a lot when I visit Europe, especially old Europe, because what you see is small family-owned shops. They dominate. You don't see the big retail chains. It's just small shops, blocks of small shops, but it actually sustains the economy. You just wake up from your flat upstairs, you come down into your shop, you spend the day, you've got your bakery, close it up, go upstairs, you sleep, you're done for the day. So it's important because they have sustained, maintained, and protected their small businesses. What we have not done is to sustain, maintain, and protect our small farmers as a group of business people. We've always considered them that they are not business people. They are struggling people. They needed to be, they need to be taken from Egypt to Canaan, but they are already in Canaan, proverbially speaking. It's just how we engage with them. It's the same kind of mistake we make when we
But we've never given them the title of breeders. We've never acknowledged their effort. What breeders have taken forward in advance, what was helped by these people, they're the ones who initially explored. So forth, this is a good one, this is this one. So there's a lot of knowledge there that we need to find different ways of valorizing that issue. And in the URP, that is one of the things that we try as an ideology, how to achieve and work with small farmers, as people who are actually running small and how we support them to better run that. We tried a lot with my colleagues because of what you say. We don't think that where's the money? And it was always an ideological system that we had to spend. It's not about how many families you go to the area and start. It's about how you improve the mindset, thinking, build capacity. If you build people's capacity, you don't need to start value. They will start. If you build their capacity, they will find autonomous pathways in the institution because you empower them. So you don't have to solve all the problems, you empower them. The biggest way of empowering everyone is people making knowledge. So we invested 5% in capacity development and showing the people. Sometimes we are just taking the people for one exposure. And the only the results are only what you see. What you not seeing can't do about it. So we all among them, took them to the program. That's so far doing there. They need to take our farmers, but they can see it. They don't have to be told that you know, for farmers. They can go and see and talk to the farmers. As a farmer, how are you doing? That's my best answer. But accessing the learning outcomes, we currently have a big project now. One project to develop knowledge from that. So some of the there just showed a flyer on county. We've got 15 crops, 15 underutilized crops. We have categorized every potential for commercialization, also potential for nutrition, underground and stress. So we've got those different packages. So we've got a policy brief on this underutilized crops that is out there in the section area where we were. We summarize all of the things that are and the recommendation of the main performance. So we are doing these outcomes, we continue to document them up until the last day of the project. We just need to find a better way of determination. Question about the focus of what we tried to do was to, in the background, take a balance with that approach. of food and feed for life. One of the things we did in the URP successfully so was to partner with other projects. So in terms of policy, what I figure here, we were the big project funded by the World Trust called the CHEFS project. The CHEFS project was designed to be like a last mile project, which takes evidence synthesis and translates it into policy. We had a lot of money there, 6 million pounds, I don't know how much it was. But it was geared towards that, it is expertise around that. So we brought steps operating within the ecosystem of the uMngeni Resilience Project, where the uMngeni Resilience Project was generating the lessons and the evidence, and through steps, we then translated this lesson and the evidence into policy outcomes and recommendations. So you see that policy brief was underutilized crop space, the shared logo. It was
Again, leveraging partnerships to deliver and also borrowing capacities. What about why call them neglected and underutilized? So they've been called many things. They've been called indigenous crops. They've been called forgotten crops. They've been called poor people's crops, orphan crops. So there are a variety of names that they've been called. A couple of years ago, I think about 10 years back, the community of practice came together and said, you know, our knowledge is fragmented because we are using all sorts of different names. We need to converge around a common name so that the knowledge base can be seen and be visible. So that's when the neglected and underutilized species news came through. So it was more of a first step towards coming up with a consensus definition just for harmonizing the research. More recently, the United States Department has come into the play together with the FAO. They are injecting serious money into this area. We had a meeting just a few weeks ago in Rome, and we were discussing a new name. So I think there's something now called VAX. I think it's valuable alternative crops or valorizing alternative crops. So there is that shift also within the community of practice to change the nomenclature to reflect something more positive. So I expect that by the end of this year, you know, the FAO is very powerful when it comes to creating precedents in terms of definitions. So if they wake up and define something, it pretty much becomes the standard definition that we run with after that. So I expect that to happen. Does government buy from these farmers? No. Government does not buy from these farmers. When we originally started working with this project, you visited Swaimani yesterday. One of the goals of establishing a community garden at Swaimani High was to link it to the school nutrition program. So our thinking was that, you know, the farmers could gather around there, produce vegetables and other things which they could, you know, prepare and link into the school nutrition program. But that's where I was saying also that there's a policy scale mismatch with government. So on the one hand, you've got government saying we want to support small scale farmers. but you've got PFMA on this other side, which is the Public Finance Management Act, which creates a centralized procurement system, which systematically excludes small farmers from being able to participate. So if government advertises a tender for the school nutrition feeding program, none of the farmers actually would qualify to bid for that tender. So even if they are within those communities, some of the people who run these feeding programs might come and buy tomatoes and subcontract them to produce certain things, which they then take and cook and bring back and so forth. But then, you know, there's now a middleman and they're getting less than what they could. So they really its various policies and say, are they speaking to each other or are they in more almost immediately a lot of small farmers. The same thing happens with young people. A lot of criteria excludes young people. I was at an event earlier this week looking at agriculture in Africa, and the funder was talking about that, you know, we have money, you should meet us halfway if you're serious, you know, meet us halfway, show us what you have. And I didn't get to ask the question for a lack of time, but my thinking was most of the people who need this funding cannot meet you halfway. So what are you doing to move yourself closer to them? That was the beauty, Mandy, of the small grants facility. That philosophy of saying, meet us halfway. And you said, we will meet you there. So you met them there, and it made the funding accessible to them. But you do not find many such cases as the small grants facility or that type of thinking. It's usually meet us here. So again, it's that policy scale mismatch that even when we do say we've created the opportunity space and so forth, the criteria that we impose then systematically excludes the very people that we want to benefit. Document the process for sharing with other parts of the world. As I mentioned, Sanbi here have graciously allowed us through the interest budget. I think it's almost 450,000 or so allocated in the interest budget for us to produce knowledge products. So we are trying, we are working around the clock to produce these knowledge products. We are hoping to, you know, come up with a process or position paper at the end that puts into perspective all of these learnings in terms of how do we deal with climate change adaptation at a local scale? How do we design projects that should be implemented at a local scale? How do you implement them? What sort of partnerships are needed to do that? So we hope to have those at the end of the project, if not by the end of this year. I think there are very important lessons that need to be shared, because a lot of the journey is really the process of how you have managed things. So thanks for that question. We'll definitely be addressing that. Any other question that I left out?
And other projects, you must be careful of double dipping. You are reporting
So we are very mindful of double dipping. So essentially what we do in terms of leveraging is we have an ecosystem of projects. So as I mentioned, we knew that the URP is funding implementation. It was not funding research. So we got like Water Research Commission to fund the research component where we had questions that needed to be asked. But what the uMngeni Resilience Project provided was the space to co-develop and co-create, and then also co-implement these solutions. Without that space, we would have not had, more contextualized research questions linked better to practice. The Chefs project, as I said, Chefs did not have a budget for data collection and experimentation. It was designed on the assumption that there exists evidence already, but that evidence needs to be better packaged to inform policy. So we leveraged the expertise there in terms of how to better analyze and package evidence to inform policy. So it's just creating a continuum, because one of the things you immediately find in the funding space is no donor funds everything. And you need to have a programmatic approach, not a projectized approach. If you have a projectized approach, you just do one thing here, 5 years goes, it ends, you move on to the next thing. So you leave a lot of sticky ends, things that are incomplete. If you want to stay with communities, be relevant to them, you need a programmatic approach where you've got different projects that come in over time. Sometimes they overlap and so forth, but you are over time addressing the broader systemic issues within those communities.
So fish, that is said about fish in the villages.
There was something said about fish, which we respond to these things. The issue of fish was raised quite a lot. We did not have the capacity or means to deal with it in the uMngeni Resilience Project, but through a new project that we've got. Matthew, you can wave your hand. Matthew is an aquatic ecosystems expert that we've brought into our team, and he is bringing that. He is working in the uMkomazi, which straddles, from Deepdale, Nklazuka, Umbumbulu, and we're starting to look at those other sides. So we learn from our mistakes, we learn where we could not do, and we try to bring in the capacity where we can. So hopefully when we scale up the URP, we now have the capacity to be able to bring these other things, to bring the livestock will be there in the scale up. We learned a lot of lessons from the rangelands management work that we did in Vulindlela and the importance of, livestock in that space. We are going to be able to bring in the aquatic food system so that we're not just looking at the terrestrial food system alone. And, with our work that we are doing on water quality, we're going to be able to better integrate the terrestrial and aquatic systems. So that's in the scale up where we are going. Rashida.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm Rashida Davids. I'm an environmental sustainability practitioner and academic. The photo mentioned I was until very recently managing the Sustainable and Healthy Food Systems Chefs program for UKZN. So thanks a lot to photo, and obviously you guys have done amazing work through this URP project. It's really inspirational, and I can see now that you're looking towards the future. So my question really is about scaling out. And a lot of the focus rural agriculture. And I just have a question, just in terms of where the world is going with regards to urbanization. And we know, like from statistics, that urban areas will be more populated in the future than rural. So looking into the future, what planning are you doing? Are you doing planning? Are you considering urban areas as well? Because in urban areas, you also have opportunity spaces for people to produce food. Households can produce food. There's a lot of urban poverty as well in different contexts. So Are you looking towards that? Because there's a lot of technology and innovation that can be focused towards that into the future, just looking at where globally we are moving towards urbanization. Thank you.
Okay, so as you know, in chefs, we have piloted working across a gradient that moves from rural, peri-urban to urban. So we, in the upscale of the URP, we now have an understanding based on the work that we did there of that gradient. And again, there's trade-offs and synergies across that gradient. So we are going to bring that thinking. We have not yet identified the areas for the upscale. Those will be identified based on some vulnerability risk assessment and so forth. And if that gradient emerges where we've got areas that straddle rural, peri-urban, and urban, we will be able to respond. The work that one of my postdocs, Malika, is doing is really focusing on, the urban side of it. We've got also a new project that we have funded by the German Federal Ministry for Food and Agriculture, looking at food environments, where we are really now trying to get that gradient working and transferring the benefits from the cities back to the rural areas for sustainability. So in the scale up in the future, it should feature.
Okay, let's give our panelists the last one.
First and last. Thank you so much. I think a lot. My name is uMngeni. I think a lot has already been said in this discussion, and I don't want to find myself repeating what has been said. But I think what is outstanding here, one, is the fact that we are recognizing that there should be a change in approach, in that we don't think an approach that says, what do you need, works. And now we are saying, what do you have to the communities? We are asking them, what do they have? And then we then come in to work with them on what they have. Because the approach that says, what do you need, is the one that creates a big dependency. And that when we leave, communities are not able to stand on their own and continue with what we had started. So that asset-based approach, for me, is the approach that when we upscale, we continue with it that way. That's one part. But I'm also interested in the issue of food waste, because we know, for example, that in South Africa, wastage of food is around 10 million tons. And we know what waste in food can do in terms of the environment. And we also know that we have about 11 to 13 million South Africans who are food insecure. And so what are the strategies around this food waste? Are we going to tap into the ideas of food bank, so that some of this food waste, that Woolworths call it food waste, for example, can be harnessed and be made to be available for consumption, so that at least because we know that if the waste in food is so high, then we continually produce the food. We are told that in 2050, the demand for food would be 60% higher than it is today. What that means is that what we are talking about here, regenerative agriculture, will be put aside, because it's not going to meet that demand of 60% higher. The agroecological approaches will not meet a demand of 60% higher than what we are at the moment. So what approaches are we coming with ourselves here, so that we minimize the waste in food, so that the demand for food is lower, because the demand is higher because food is wasted? So for me, I think I want us to think along those lines, so that this issue of agroecological agriculture can make sense. Otherwise, it will not make sense to tell somebody that I want you to produce 60% more than we are doing now, and they say use agroecological approaches. So they are good. We want to use them. And I think Tafasa has already shared. I want to answer to add what on the answer that Tafasa has indicated before I pass the mic, that the government developed a policy, an implementation plan called Food and Nutrition Security Implementation Plan 2018 to 2023. 2023 is already finished. The plan is not fully operational. It's still operating in silos. But the idea in the plan is there for these smallholder farmers to supply schools and other small enterprises to become part of the government expenditure, the money that the government is spending. So I think it's up to us to look into those policies and see how we push government to really do what they committed, what they committed to doing. Thanks.
I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Dirwai because he hasn't said anything.
They call me Tinashe where I work. Thank you. So thank you all. You've been a marvelous audience. No questions directed to us. Thank you very much. My closing remark would be, there was a question on diversification, and you mentioned fish in the process. And I think it's important that the URP explores that space, considering that KZN has 100+ kilometers of coastline, dotted with so many fish villages there. So it's very important that we intervene and engage with those communities for diversification, because it then answers the question, what is food? It really depends on where you live. People in landlocked areas, starchy food is food to them, and people in the coastal areas, fish food and aquatic foods form part of their main diet. So it's really important, and it's very much encouraged that we see more of Prof-T's work extend to the coasts and work with coastal villages. Thank you.
Professor, I will spare you. You talked enough. You want to talk?
No, I'm done.
No, you're done.
I've really sang for my supper.
So, I think it was a very interesting. We started with the Vimbai, and the professor came in from nowhere. He expanded so much. Yeah. So it really cleared a lot of air. Some people say, oh, yeah, what's this man is well spent, all this. But we are convinced. So I would like you to help me to thank our panelists and our presenters for having prepared very nice presentations. Can you clap hands for them again? And our friend from FAO, please tell us the new name for neglected, underutilized crops next time we meet in a conference. All right, thank you very much. So I don't know, Lopai, do you have an announcement? Yeah, sure. You know, that's what I like about the participation. The points. What is the time now?
Yeah, the time is 16:35. Yeah, so thanks very much to our audience online for joining us for this particular session. We hope that you found it useful as we did, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with any one of us if you've got comments. Sean, I will be in touch with you regarding how we can take forward some of the learnings through the Durban Research Action Partnership. So thanks very much.